Hi there, this is Permanent Pilgrim, otherwise known as Jamie. I'm currently in the Spanish Appalachians at a wonderful camp that I know and I've been back to a few times already. A very productive place for me. Today I'm going to be looking at the question of what is ascension? Now, a permanent pilgrim knows that one's physical journey and one's spiritual journey is one and the same. So we don't need to be thinking about the question, what is spiritual ascension? We're just looking at ascension. I'm going to cover quite a lot in this video. I'll do some little sections, and then later on I'll come back and look at some of those sections more closely. Now, as far as we're aware, this is the first time in the history of the universe that a third dimensional planet, our Earth, and all its inhabitants are being adjusted and stepped up in frequency gradually from third dimension through fourth dimension and into fifth dimension and beyond. This is an organic ascension process, which is the invitation for which is presenting itself to so many at this time. I'm often asked, will it happen to everyone? And you know, how do you know? And a lot of questions about this kind of thing. But you know, essentially, we've had a first wave from 2012 onwards who've gone through the process that I'm going to describe. And part of my service is providing information, whether it be through videos or articles, or really primarily through my writing, my poetry, to assist what we could call the second and third waves, if it doesn't sound too hierarchical, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. Really, ascension is the conscious choice to engage in the expansion of consciousness, to reconnect with levels of self that you've not been able to, or one has not been able to connect with up to now, in this incarnation and perhaps in the others. We're reunifying with Source. We're leaving behind what could be called a training program of separation from Source. It's a deep transformation, comes in different stages. It's going to involve upgrades and changes to the DNA, to the heart magnetics. It certainly comes a lot through the physical body, which we'll look at. And this process, this path, takes us on a journey where we move towards embodying our true selves. And this has various terminologies attached to it. I quite like the idea of a solo sovereign self. We're looking at, other people might call that a sort of eternal essence, divine essence. I mean, we need to be careful, and I'll look at during the video how many different terminologies there are, and sort of confusion and so on comes from that. But that's what it is. Really thinking about, you know, will this happen to everyone, or, you know, how do you know it's happening and so on. really, regardless of whether you're conscious of it or not, the influx of higher frequencies is affecting everyone and everything. You know, really, in a lifetime, even those who are not awake, or who we might consider not to be awake, are still learning, still going through the process that they asked to before they came. So whether we're walking consciously or unconsciously, we're still evolving as beings. I will be talking about the first wave quite a lot. I'll also be looking at the question of how do I ascend? What do I do? How do I prepare for that? And what's necessary? But it's certainly worth pointing out at the beginning that, you know, really every thought, every emotion, every action is having an effect from everyone, having an effect on the collective consciousness and on the not necessarily the speed, but the process that the planet is going through. So even these small steps of moving towards a truer self, meeting personal challenges, making changes in our everyday lives, you know, all of these are relevant. It should be clear, I think, to those of you watching this video that there has been an enormous increase in the amount of awakenings happening on the planet. I am going to reference 2012 quite a lot, so perhaps even a little before there and after then, this is a common thing. In my language, I talk about people popping, you know, so I would say that people were popping all over the place. And in my opinion, this has been gradually intensifying since 2012. The commonality, perhaps, there are a lot of commonalities there, but the commonality really I would like to focus on today is the great internal changes that this brings, and perhaps even a growing desire to discover one's own unique vision, unique mission, and your place in the collective, your role. And I'm guessing that most people who go through that awakening are having to step out of familiar contexts and step out of familiar roles and allow their life to be remixed from the inside out. So, ascension, every aspect, every level, every layer of a person's being will undergo an acute transformation. The different levels of the being, I'm certainly no expert on this, but your mental, your emotional, your physical, your egoic, your spiritual levels, all need to evolve. The structures of those need to evolve in order to meet the demands of the higher frequency, the higher frequencies. And if we imagine ourselves as what we are, truly enormous spiritual beings, eternal beings, who've been compressed into this physical form for this incarnation and the others, we understand that transforming out of that compression is going to require a great deal of evolution of the self. We to level up our awareness. We need to transform our point of perception. The point of perception is exceptionally important in all of this. And we have a series of goals that we'll look at, one of which is to live an extremely fulfilling life that encompasses all that we are. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm dealing with a few teething issues with the equipment, which is always a bit difficult, living in permanent pilgrimage. So here we go again, a little bit of tea. Okay. So, you know, this era that we're living through has been talked about in spiritual circles, in ancient cultures, for a long, long time. I wasn't aware of that, or really what was happening to me when I started on my path, when the ascension process really began for me. When I speak to young people, younger than me, 20s, in their 20s, sometimes early 30s, the fact that I didn't know resonates, because the response I often get is to talking about things like gradual transformation to lightbody, is that the individual would express that they know that this is part of their journey, or they feel that, but it feels a little overwhelming, which is absolutely on the money. It feels a little overwhelming, and they'd rather that their journey at this time is more manageable. So I briefly summarize what led me into this, or how I was led into this. I went through my spiritual awakening in 2008, after a dark period in my life. It's very common to this. I actually went through a process of psychotherapy, which turned into the awakening, and I was very focused, really, apart from the beauty of sort of moving up in a level of awareness, the beauty of that, the new perspective of that, I was very focused on vision. So without going into detail, I had a vision, and I wanted to move towards that. And as part of that, the Camino de Santiago came in, and I began walking on that regularly, really, every year for a few years. And my experiences on the Camino, in particular, someone I met on my first Camino, and what happened between us, and then sort of letting go of that, led to my Kundalini awakening. I'd had experiences up to before then, which meant that wasn't a complete shock when it happened, but I still didn't, or I should say I'd experienced states of consciousness, or sort of downloads on a very temporary level prior to that, which meant that wasn't a complete surprise. But really, when that happened, and I spent, even though I was working, I spent much of that year, which was 2012, so the Kundalini awakening actually happened on the 2nd of January 2012. I spent much of that year researching and finding information and digesting that to understand what was going on, and it was quite full on. And it was overwhelming. At that point, I sort of felt that I'd reached the end of my journey, really. And during that year, I became more aware of the kind of thing that I'm talking about now through certain individuals who presented that information in a very digestible way. To finish that off, what I understood as the Kundalini awakening then seeged into this gradual integration of the spiritual light body while in human form. And this is what we're talking about today, ascension. But I wasn't heading for it. And here we have to be careful. One has to be careful in today's world. There's so much marketing out there. There's so many people offering services about, light body activation, this, and, Kundalini yoga, that, and all of this stuff. It's not for me to pass any judgment on those individual things or services or whatever, but just giving you a perspective here that actually neither myself or those that I'm connected with actually were trying to do this. I wasn't trying to awaken Kundalini. I had not gone on my first Camino in order for that. I'd gone there because that was felt at the time that it was part of my vision. So we weren't, even though I was consciously working on myself and developing my meditation and all sorts of things, trying to transform my life, moving towards transforming my life, I wasn't considering any of this stuff. I didn't know what Kundalini was. I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I would have guessed what the light body was, but I wasn't really aware of that. So I think that's important to communicate. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of terminologies, a lot of modalities, a lot of people using all of those different words and so on in different ways and assuming that there's shared meaning, and there isn't. Yeah, I know this is part of my journey, but I just want it to be manageable at this time. That's a common response. There is a first wave. There was a first wave. There has been a first wave who will have, prior to December 2012, will have gone through some form of Kundalini awakening, spiritual awakening, some form of Kundalini awakening. Many of those people would have been very advanced by the time that happened and would have been out there, thinking of certain people in particular, would have been out there providing information for others, and other people such as myself were beginners, newbies to this, as as happening quickly, and it was quite a thing. So those first wave, and again, everyone is always playing their part, in all sorts of ways. But that first wave were in position come the 21st of December, when what I felt actually in my own heart was the shift in like a new operating system on the planet. Without going into too much of that, it was being anchored in, and part of the way it was being anchored in was through willing hearts. That since then there's been a palpable intensification, I'm sure, for everyone in different ways. For the first wave, like I say, the Kundalini process of clearing chakras and so on, seeging into this gradual integration of the light body. Also remember that radical thinking throughout history, new radical thinking has often been met with ridicule, until it's sort of proved or accepted, and then it becomes dogma. So, you know, we're still living in that paradigm, really. Although, of course, with the amount of information out there, the amount of perspectives out there, we have moved on. So what I'd like to communicate is that since 2012, that first wave have been, in a way, pioneering, piloting this transformation ahead of the collective. I've got a few reasons I've written down why that was the case, and that has been the case. The transitioning of this first wave. They're building bridges. They've worked to pierce the sort of collective bubble of consciousness, which has also happened in other ways with individuals who've not been going through that process. But there has been an amount of people who have piloted to make it easier for the next waves, for the masses, for the next waves. Those individuals are developing paths of higher service, whether that be through their creativity, through their offering of sessions, videos, you know, courses, all sorts of ways that's been happening. And this piloting has been necessary to, you know, to avoid sort of overwhelm or even panic, really, when this comes in. I believe it's already coming in, but as this continues. I think I'm always interested by the popularity of like superhero movies, because and they often, this sort of about mutations and things like that somebody becomes a superhero through some process of mutation. And actually mutation is extremely important in evolution, in the evolution of a species, in terms of the individuals who go first, and the mutation is making them more adapted. And although I don't see the light body, because everyone is carrying that, everyone has that, not integrated into the body, but everyone has that in some way, their eternal light body. It's a little bit like this first wave have gone through as a kind of mutation, you know, in order to then adapt to this new operating system. Along the way, each of those first wave will have been required to clear all distortions in their being, all dissonances, to disentangle themselves from lower, denser realities, and to embrace all aspects of themselves, of their eternal, essential nature, which most likely some of those things would have been present, and other things would need, you know, would need some remixing. Certainly my experience, to come in line with their organic ascension blueprints. So, commonalities of that is a dramatic change in the parameters by which we experience reality. And this is happening for all, this will be happening for all. We've understood that you go through a spiritual awakening. At some point you have a Kundalini awakening. Kundalini is an incredibly difficult thing to speak about. So many different understandings about what that is, and I would have struggled with it before it happened. to comprehend how that would feel and what it was. And this segues into the gradual transformation to lightbody, the gradual integration of lightbody into the physical form. There's lots of modalities out there in terms of evolving and what's necessary for example, a Kundalini awakening to happen. My own terminology is around there being 3 keys. The first one, the alchemy of self-love. Really this came in through the psychotherapy and the kind of process that I went through there, and coming to a position of self-love and putting that into action. The second key, in my way of looking at it, is love for the journey so far, and by which I mean in this lifetime and progressively really in all the others as well, as you develop that knowledge about previous incarnations and so on. Love for the journey that's taken you to this point. The third key, again, this is just my way of looking at it, is unconditional love for another or others. Position of unconditional love for an other. And actually that was absolutely what happened prior to my Kundalini awakening. That third key, it's not necessarily that those 3 would happen 1, 2, 3, they're just 3 separate things. When that third key fell into place, I went through the Kundalini awakening. So we're changing our experience from the inside out. I've got some notes here. This is a little complex, so forgive me if I'm reading a little bit from them or looking at those. Through this process, what are we doing? Change of focus is a big one. Change of focus, change of context. You know, you are what you focus on. You want to be in better context. Me, I'm in this kind of place because it's so good for my poetry, really, and for clear thinking. Changing what you focus on, what you do, you know, essentially what you do with your time. An expansion, you know, again at the beginning I think I mentioned about not needing to be separate from, not needing to feel separate from source. So we're beginning to, through this process, beginning to feel part of all that is. You know, everything that's happening around us is connected to our journey at that time. I mean, a big part of this is refining your frequency. 2 things with frequency: refining your frequency, continually refining it. And this may be in very idiosyncratic ways that other people may not understand why it's so important. And also holding your own frequency, being able to hold your own frequency, whatever's happening in the external. So we're through this process moving towards and moving through both of those processes. Things which are really important: non-attachment, non-duality, non-judgment. Maybe a little bit too much for me to go into today. Non-attachment really is keeping one's internal, being in control of one's internal world, regardless of what's happening in the external. Non-judgment, it comes up again and again and again. Starts with non-judgment of the self, and again accepting your own journey, accepting yourself. And non-duality, really understanding how many, you know, so many truths exist at the same time, is essentially non-duality. Something that we build through the ascension process is a position of what's being termed by people that I respect divine neutrality. You know, some things, like today I've had 2 hours really of discovering that the microphones I was going to use for this video don't agree with my phone. and I'm wearing a little cheap headphone thing. I think there's a hum in the background. So anyway, the audio is going to be terrible. Hopefully not too much wind noise, but I've had to be, to be neutral through that and say, okay, well, it's a learning process, and I don't have to carry the microphones anymore on my way. But keeping that position of divine neutrality, which is quite close to non-attachment, becomes a real motor for things. If we can stay in that neutral position, regardless of what's happening, and it doesn't mean that we're not feeling terrific at times, it's just being neutral about and not judging it and so on, then that's becoming a bit of an engine for what comes in, and making everything smoother. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly, and come back to some of them later in later videos. The ego has a terrible reputation, often in spiritual circles. I mean, actually, the ego is not there to be jettisoned, it's there to be transformed. We're transforming that into a kind of form of unity consciousness, really. There's lots of different forms of that, but we're transforming, we're refining it, we're working on it, and at some point it's important. It doesn't go, it's just transformed. I'll leave it at that for now. On one's ascension process, one becomes more concerned and aware of what is the sort of highest good for the whole, considering the whole how one is, one's being and one's doing and one's having. This becomes just very natural. Making higher choices. I'm looking down at the moment, making higher choices and for yourself and for others. We have to use our discernment, so the information that's out there and what's relevant for us. And we may have teachers that we really think the world of for a period of time, and then actually at some point we sort of don't need them anymore and we move on to the next one. Ignoring the noise, ignoring the distractions, and getting on with our jobs, really, and our transformation. Falling over is certainly part of the process. I've fallen over rather a lot, and even though it was frustrating for long periods of time, it has built some capacities in me which I'm okay with now. I'm okay with what happened. Taking leaps of faith. I mean, lots of people are experiencing this in different ways. Leaps of faith into different levels of service, different kinds of service. Reoccurrence is an important thing, that some of the issues that one finds most difficult to get over, get through, these can be considered reoccurring, that these are actually issues for us on a bit of an not eternal, but it's part of our true essence. We do have these challenges, and these are sort of manifested in our incarnations, and we may have experienced these in many different lifetimes. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is very grounded, even though we're talking about high states of consciousness and expanding consciousness and so on. I mean, a lot of this is like super grounded, like having a pencil and notebook on you all the time, structuring your day so that you're able to really prioritize the creative moments, the creative flow, little things like that. Looking out for your reactions when you're in the world, all sorts of, super grounded. Many will deal with overwhelm at different times, and this is very natural. Something which helps deal with that is gradually grows a more eternal perspective on what's going on. This can assist with issues, I don't know, relationships with family, something like that. You start to realize that, you know, one has chosen one's parents and perhaps even had them as parents before, you know, and this gives a new perspective on certain things which you may have found problematic in your life. I'm going to leave it at that. So we're moving up through the levels of awareness. We're transforming our point of perception, and this is super. All of these things kind of feed into the point of perception, which is then sort of transmitting and interpreting and creating the reality. So the point of perception is really that, you know, is a super important thing. Through the gradual integration of lightbody, the structures of the physical being are upgraded, more crystalline based structures, activation of dormant DNA. You know, each of us has this, everyone has this DNA which holds the codes which are necessary to develop into a kind of creator consciousness. So anyone on the ascension path will have had to choose a less linear life, and through this we'll be discovering sort of missions and visions and so on, and recovering the creative, discovering or recovering the creative self. Often this idea of remixing, you know, that you may have been doing something and then it's remixed a little bit, and then that's what you end up, be it that part of your service, your juicy service, which really fits you like a glove. I'm quoting from my own poetry there. We become more non-attached, I think, to identity, particularly identity that we had in the past, even periods of time perhaps when we weren't happy, or the struggles that we had. There's a non-attachment to that. You know, I can certainly say that I've been stuck in loops on this path for, you know, far too long. That was good for anyone. But I'm non-attached to that. I'm not thinking. I may have had to go through a little process where I've got to that point of non-attachment. But you know, to worry about how long it's all taking, or, you know, I haven't done this, haven't done that. You know, we're just getting to a point where we're non-attached and actually being able to be productive through that, and grow the being through that. Entanglement. So we're disentangling from lower, denser realities. We're realizing that entanglements that we had were sort of coping mechanisms to deal with the training program. Really, we release density. We release density by releasing those entanglements. We release density in the body by upgrading what's going in, and, I don't know, doing yoga or whatever it is. With me, it's a lot of walking and high vibrational foods, and the thoughts and emotions. All of these things are stored in the body, of course. Many people are aware of that. The body's keeping the score and so on. So these densities are released through this process. Sometimes a density, if you think of it as a crystal, you know, it can be released by a blow in exactly the right place, and boom, it's gone. And other ones take a lot of erosion, you know, and time again. seeing beyond dogma, even in the alternative world, different spiritual traditions and so on. There's a lot of dogma out there, and I think I've already talked a little bit about, you know, the confusing terminologies and so on. And dogma exists a lot, and on this path, you know, your experience is going to be unique. It does resonate with all sorts of different spiritual traditions or even religions and so on. But we walk beyond dogma. We don't let that influence us, and that can be, again, a little unpalatable. It can make you a little unpopular in certain situations where something is taken as truth, and actually you know that it's really there to be evolved. So these old constructs, we're really discovering that there are a lot of old constructs that are being broken apart, you know, essentially by the higher harmonics that are coming in, and you're becoming a conduit for that. And it's non-stop, you know, it continues, it's unstoppable. And so a lot of letting go. This is bringing one to a position of personal harmony, and again we could use the term different forms of unity consciousness. For example, balancing the typically feminine, typically masculine energies within might be one form of unity consciousness. The process of building a light body, you know, how long does it go on? I can't tell you that. It's now, for me, it's 2024, so it's 12 years since the Kundalini awakening. And when does that become the integration of light body? I couldn't tell you when that sort of seeging happened, but at some point it did, and it was quite noticeable. But we're building that over time, you know, not worrying too much about how slowly or quickly that's happening. That light body is being built to a point where one can operate from 0 point. A 0 point really in the heart, where you have been trained on responsible creation, responsible co-creation. And from that 0 point, I mean, things are happening, are mirroring that, you know, straight away. So you're in any kind of situation, and you know, you're aware that things are kind of, you know, the communication is coming into you all the time, and this is important, you know, for becoming a pure conduit of source, an expression of your divine essence, that you're able to create responsibly and to focus on the positive things and the things which are in alignment with what you're doing. It's an artist's mindset, really, you know, that you're making your impact on the world through what you're creating. You're creating your being, you're creating your doing, your having, and you're creating your expressions which are having their impact, your projects, you know, and one has to be responsible. And actually all of those skills that I was talking about a few minutes ago, you know, ultimately these are skills which a divine being requires. You know, one can't sculpt other beings or conducting that and get too attached, to let that affect, when somebody falls over, to let that affect one goes, one's a lighthouse, one keeps shining the light. So the kind of things that I've been talking through very quickly are skills learned on a training program, which is leading one to be able to be a pure conduit for source. not, often we're having that fight or flight response, then comes the divine neutrality, and we don't need to fight or flight. Let's just keep moving towards the project goal, whether that's a creative project or something in the world or something we need to work on within ourselves. Things which are important, becoming progressively more important, is a consistency in daily practice, in one's being, having a consistency, not too up and down. Certainly humility is going to be a big part in the training program. I can make this video and then, tomorrow I go into town. Well, I'm not evangelically going to be talking about the ascension process. I'm going to be going about my day with humility and have an interaction with the locals. Things I've notes here: humility, transparency in what you're doing on all levels, compassion, again, which has to come from compassion for the self, for one's journey, for one's mistakes and so on, or perceived mistakes. And service. Service is juicy service. It's service which you're really going to love. That's a goal. These are goals which I'm speaking about now. This rewrite happens through the body. We're walking towards a reunification with the I am presence. I've heard it called this. And this gives us an opportunity for a unique experience, but it's also very exacting and very challenging. Okay, so I've got a little section down here which is on the positive sort of goals, but what are the really positive things that happen during this ascension process? We're transcending density through our organic ascension process in the physical. Remember that. So it's not visible to other people, but it's extremely palpable. I mean, that's not even correct. It's felt, absolutely felt, at all times. We come into a sort of permanent state, not permanent, but we're often in a state of lucid dreaming. The dream world actually restructures, so it's not, it can't be considered to be symbolic anymore. It's really, you experience something in your lucid dreaming and then you integrate that into your 3D. That's the general path. And that's quite something to leave behind, that sort of symbolic dream vocabulary and everything. It's very direct. The communication, the instructions and so on are very direct. There's an expansion of our senses. Of course, many individuals have maybe one or two or something of these senses already online. I'm talking about things like clairaudience, clairvoyance, claircognizance. There's one more I can't think of right now. But these different, clairaudience is actually hearing individuals speaking to you. Claircognizance, it was really knowing, just knowing, why are you doing that? Oh, I just know that that's what I need to do. Why? I don't need a why, I know. We're learning daily multidimensionality, so we're accessing those dimensions of ourself that were always happening, but we just didn't have access to it, and we're learning how to go about that in daily life. I mean, a lot happens at night in the dream state, but this also happens, you can turn to the left and suddenly you're in another realm and you have an experience in that realm and then you're back in again. often warning comes in by a high-pitched sound in the ear, and then maybe you're going to have some other dimensional experience. Certainly contact with other dimensional beings, which, just for the purposes of this video and for my creativity, my poetry and so on, I talk about as star soul family or soul star family, one of the two. Yeah, this is a big thing, and it becomes progressively more important from, in all different ways. So more important, but more regular. Certainly at key times it might happen that one finds oneself on the lightships with a crew, and you realize that one part of yourself is actually aboard that lightship on whatever mission or whatever project that lightship is working on. That's part of who you are, and you may recognize important individuals in your life, and realize that there's a team there for you to be working with that may come in soon. I'll talk about that more in other videos. Actually, for me, it was not something that interested me in my life until it started happening, and it first happened in a gentle way, and then it was far from gentle. Very, very difficult to understand what was going on, but really recognizing that this was visitations and communications and interactions with other dimensional beings, assisting, of course. How does the light body feel? Well, it's kind of like a plasma. That's the best way. That's not coming from me. That's coming from others who've used this word, and this is very much how it feels. A sort of delicious plasma that's moving through the being, and this can give some, delicious is the word, delicious feelings and so on, blissful feelings and release of heaviness and density and everything, and that's actually felt. So this is certainly a positive. Forgetting how it felt in the bad times. Literally, sometimes you might just be brought back for just 10 seconds or something like that to feel how it was during that couple of years where you were doing something completely unrelated to what you wanted to do, or you were feeling depressed or whatever. Actually forget how it is. The lower emotions really disappear. They may come back in a very short, make it angry or something like that, but it's going to only happen for a very short period of time, and then it'll just go, because it doesn't really exist in your being anymore. Certainly, lifting of the veils is a nice thing that people talk about, so that really you're experiencing the divine in everything. You're really progressively able to walk in all realms. As a sort of as a conduit of divine will and truth, as your expression expresses it. And that feeling again with the light body can feel that plasma and so on. That feeling of what one might call divine love is incredible. And of course, people are able to get some kind of temporary access to that. But imagine if that's becoming a more and more permanent state. That's certainly something to be valued. I can't say that bliss is my resting state yet, but at times it can be. And I think a master who has walked along this road for a long time could be considered to have bliss as his or her resting state. I'm looking at my notes. What else do I want? Yes, to say that the radical self is not puritanical. So, the idea of ascension and so on, becoming, and purity and so on, you become you become your radical self, and your radical self is certainly not puritanical. Okay, so I've mentioned the fifth dimension. What is it? My way of talking about this, I've written down here, the fifth dimension is a state of awareness. It's also a vibrational plane. It's also an embodied reality that transcends the limits of the physical and reaches into higher realms of existence. That's my definition, which I've put together, researched. We're thinking of this as a flowing, energetic world of sort of instant possibility, limitless creation, inner and outer harmony. Obviously the inner harmony comes first, and deep connection. And this is going to be central to what might be called a coming golden age on the planet. And that's what we're part of at this time, this amazing era. And to recap, in order to support these higher frequencies permanently and operate from this higher understanding, each individual will be invited to embark on a process of gradually integrating their spiritual light body into their physical form. So it's a merging of the higher, divine, infinite self with the lower, human, finite self. This is a profound journey to embodiment of one's own eternal essence, one's own unique eternal essence as solo sovereign self. And actually I think that better way of describing it than an ascension process is an ascension and descension process, because really your higher self is let's say coming down, and the lower self is coming up to meet each other and merge. So there is a learning and adaptation and so on happening on both sides of that. So it's not going to be a hashtag on YouTube or anything, but I do like to think of it as an ascension and descension process. And to sort of finalize that recapping, this process requires us to untie the knots in our own consciousness through direct lived experience. There are no shortcuts. There's no substance that you can take, nothing that you can take from the external which is going to hurry it up. And when we consider this on a planetary level, something I find useful is to think about the resurrection of the planet being dependent on the resurrection of the self, and these things are happening at the same time. I mean, in fact, the planet is looking after herself very well, and it's up to us to meet these challenges, to move up through the levels of awareness, recapping again, integrate wisdom, knowing, connection to higher divine aspects of the self which have been dormant. We've already talked about how we've always been multidimensional, but these levels have remained inaccessible to us. Remember, at this time there are a lot of changes happening in the world on a political level, social, financial, all of these things. There's, in terms of thinking about the cosmos, sort of solar changes, and there's a lot going on, but really it's the resurrection of the self which is important. We begin to resonate with new ways of being, doing and having. We're choosing ways and we're being trained to choose ways that better fit this new operating system. Again, recapping a little bit, planetary ascension can be approached as a change of frequency, a progressive change of frequency, dimensions, levels of consciousness, are based on vibration. Each dimension has a bandwidth of frequencies which create the reality, and that's how we experience that dimension. Something I found helpful along the way was to think about yourself in a bubble or perhaps a box which has parameters, and this is where you sort of currently are. What's really super useful is to, you're moving towards or moving into the next level of bubble or box, and to just even integrate the knowing that there is more that you cannot yet perceive. This helps greatly. We integrate the learnings, we take leaps in knowing and trust, we level up the point of perception, and that's how we graduate into the next bubble. And the last thing to say really on a planetary level is that as the frequency, the bandwidth rises, all beings have to resonate at that level or above, or else they cannot exist. It's quite simple. Okay, so in this part I'm dealing with the sun coming through the trees. Try to get some consistency. I don't have a continuity member of staff on hand. Anyway, I'll move a little bit. So this part, looking at, how do I ascend? People might ask, won't this happen anyway? Obviously I've covered quite a few things rapidly during this video, so there'll be some repetition here, but the important thing to remember, some important things to remember: one can have temporary access to these other realms and higher dimensions and sort of like 5D flow and so on, certainly. Permanent access requires the light-body integration process, the ascension process, to occur. Is certainly more accessible than ever before. Part of that work was done by past masters who might be considered to have put templates in place to assist at this time. Part of that work has been done by the first wave in ways that I've already covered to assist the collective, the next waves, shall we say. And part of that work has been done by every being on the planet, taking steps and moving towards a higher expression of self. One thing, bearing in mind I spend quite a lot of time alone, is we think that on this path it's a good idea to try to balance your time alone with time in some kind of group or group interactions or connecting with people. This is another form of unity consciousness and a more supportive context. Certainly I probably spend too much time on my own in the past, and that's changing at this point in my life as I come together with an appropriate context moving forward with projects and so on. So there's a little bit of a change happening for me. But we are being called to work together, we're being called to create together, to come together. So of course one needs to build in the alone time, but finding balance there, as with a lot of things, is very important. I'm going to focus here maybe in terms of the preparation, because one doesn't really decide to descend. One decides to go on their own journey and to become a higher expression and so on, but it's almost like the invitation comes in really from your own divine self at the right time, really. But in terms of preparation, some things that can be done, my strongest piece of advice is to do the heavy lifting as early as possible. So it might be behaviors or habits or substances or something, routine problems or something that there could be these reoccurring issues, is to start work on them, is to start doing the heavy lifting of those. And I actually knew that early on, and I struggled a lot, and this led to these kind of periods of looping which were difficult, certainly not comfortable. I've got here, I'm going to read from this list here. Clear and retrain the lower emotional, egoic and mental constructs which block higher states of consciousness. I'm sure many of you are involved in this kind of healing, I suppose it would be called, clearing and retraining. And as we retrain, things start to become on autopilot. So what might have taken a lot of work at the beginning becomes on some kind of autopilot as we progress. Clear the physical body of low vibrational foods and substances. Well, there's lots of people out there making videos about that, so I'll leave it at that. I've written here again, it's repetition, but reoccurrence. There are challenges one has always faced, and if you do some self-inquiry and look back on one's life, I always had problems with making productive time in mornings and having a good sort of routine in the mornings, and that was a real problem for me at all different points. And actually in the end, now that's my most productive and most creative time with my poetry, is in the morning. So it was clear that was something I needed to integrate. It's not designed to be comfortable. There are times on this path that I've been extremely uncomfortable. I wonder what the hell I was doing, really. And this is part of the process. Expansion happens through highs and lows, really. And there's no getting away from that. One does have to go through some difficult processes to overcome some of these personal challenges, issues. Sorry, don't shoot the messenger. Do things that light you up, and the things that light you up will most likely change a little bit and be remixed, is the way that I like to think about it. Refined, but as early on, spending time doing that, and consider that to be work. We use this word work in a strange way. Doing things that light you up is work. So with this clearing, this kind of clearing, people call it healing, I suppose, will progressively free the true self to embody its own unique expression of the divine. Much more expansive human state, and that actually happens with the light body expanding, and one might be in a sort of sacred place at eclipse or something like that, and one would feel the light body expand, like 10 miles in each direction. Incredible, really, and sometimes other people can feel that. To repeat, it's not all plain sailing. It's going to take you down some roads you didn't want to go. We've got some mechanisms within it, and I'm sure people will feel this in their own life as well, of intensification. And sometimes a lot of those challenges are coming in all at the same time, which is, can be felt as being too much. um, unraveling at different times, but maybe you've continued with something which is a bit dissonant, and that will unravel. So you certainly have some kind of unraveling early on in your process, and this is likely to repeat itself at different times, perhaps getting easier, or perhaps more difficult on one particular thing, maybe that you knew you needed to let go of or evolve, and that you hadn't, and maybe it becomes difficult. And finally, with that is the idea of waves of ascension. So these waves are coming and coming and coming, and sometimes you get down, you get sort of, you feel like you're drowning at some points, but you always find a lifeline. There'll always be a lifeline there. That's one thing that's been very clear to us to pass on. Big change can be rough. So yeah, as the sun gets down, tricky for me, a challenge. So in anyone's ascension path, you're going to have your spiritual awakening. At some point there's going to be a Kundalini awakening, and it may be that there's different forms of that will come in. I don't know, I can't say. Certainly myself and others that I'm connected with was something of a classic Kundalini awakening. I'm not going to speak about Kundalini here because of how garbled the definitions and the approach to that is in the world at the moment, so perhaps another video. A lot of misinformation, basically. And then that segues into your gradual integration of light body into your physical form. Thinking just very quickly about the dimensions, I've written a few things down about 3D and 4D. 3D being a bit of a state of mind, physical awareness, spiritual amnesia, you've forgotten previous lifetimes, inability to perceive of higher dimensions or even the possibility of that. The world has been shifting out of this for some time, and really, as far as we are aware, the 3D, what held the 3D in place has fallen away. So really what's keeping that kind of world going is the, waking up every day and thinking the same thing, and thoughts and emotions and so on. So actually people are generating that almost artificially. The magnetics, the harmonics and so on that were keeping that in place have broken down. 4D, here I have written, developing and maintaining a 4D perspective, continuing to live in the physical world while becoming aware of the spiritual and emotional dimensions beyond it. Okay, so thoughts and actions and emotions and so on are more in harmony with the higher self and the universe. One begins to attract in that to your life. There's more a reflection of that, more in alignment with your higher purposes and so on. 4D is pretty difficult to explain because it seems like there are different levels of 4D, mid and lower, mid and upper. A lot of work, for example, of people who are interested in shamanic stuff is happening in the 4D, and it's quite dramatic. And my experience tells me that many of those who are destined for ascension to 5D and beyond don't really resonate with that. So there's a change happening there. We can also think about the 4D as the psyche. Sometimes at night things are happening just to change that around. And sometimes 4D is felt as a physical realm that you could just switch into, a bit like a lucid dream that just happens without warning quite often. as one enters the 5D realm, this might be characterized by a heightened awareness. It's experienced, where one feels deep connection to everything. Deep compassion is really important for all beings. You're operating from a higher perspective, which is filled with love, but a very particular kind of pure, radiant, unconditional love. Here, the material world is not having much impact on the internal. It's really the other way around. Point of perception is leveling up. Relationships would shift. Context will shift. Focus moves, in terms of your service and the things which give you joy, that these are directed towards uplifting humanity. You're moving towards fulfilling your missions. Whether you do that or not is to do with your how you engage with it and your reactions and your actions. We've looked at how you can have temporary access. Many people will experience temporary access to this kind of thing. Permanent access does require the light-body transformation process. The light-body is the missing part of the human, at least at this stage, is the missing part of the human. The process, I've got some notes, the process is metaphysical, it's also biochemical, so almost two opposites together there. It's very real for the person going through it, but also very conceptual, as you can understand by me trying to explain it in this video. We do need consistency of practice. It's difficult to imagine how this might feel, just like it's difficult to imagine what a Kundalini awakening would feel like, or what Kundalini is. But it's incredibly palpable for those going through it. And it's unstoppable. Once started, it's unstoppable. We're moving towards a resolution of all that is not in alignment with true self. All distortion or dissonance, all that is not love, again, a very particular kind of love. Here, it's important to say that, now in your life, and progressively more and more as the veils get lifted, you are on a curriculum. There is a curriculum being laid out in front of you. And there may be units, and the idea, the best thing to do is to engage with that curriculum. There may be units within that curriculum that you find, difficult, impossible, and it may be that you have to keep repeating. You give it one go and then it comes back in and it comes back. There's a lot of patience there. At some point, if you're really struggling with a unit, you may begin to, have an experience where the repercussions for not integrating that learning become quite acute or even drastic. And this, this is a truth on the ascension path. Patience, but when the time comes, it has to be done. We know that Gaia wishes to take as many of us through this shift as possible. I can't say any more about that. I don't have any information about numbers or whether this is everyone or something which is, I think, not very well integrated by a lot of people is that you're always at the starting line. In any kind of training program, you're actually always at the starting line. You graduate with your degree and you're on to the masters, the PhD, it continues, writing the book, delivering the lectures. It's a good idea to consider yourself to be always at the starting line. And I think if you're anything like myself, I think I already said earlier on that when the Kundalini awakening came, I thought that was it. It was like fantastic. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but it did feel like I was at the summit of something. And it was really years later that I sort of thought back over it, reflected on it, and realised this aspect, which is very useful, is to consider yourself to be always at the starting line. a lot of spiritual dogma will have to be reviewed, and it's that simple. A lot of things which are considered to be truth will be reviewed, because this process is intense. It's very, very different, and it's like almost like new manuals are having to be written. Okay, so light body integration, the kind of things that to expect, actually lower emotions fall away, so we don't experience those anymore. More and more attracting to you immediately as you move towards what we would term 0 point, attracting immediately, even if you're angry, you're attracting some anger. Third eye opening, this kind of thing, which a lot of people will experience in different ways, not just to do with light body integration. Progressively being able to hear your own guidance, the guidance coming from your own divine self more and more clearly, and hearing that voice and acting on it and integrating it. Part of the process is, at the beginning, working to consciously police and change your thought processes, the emotions, your reactions, and then finding as you go on that this becomes on autopilot, so you don't have to work at it anymore, which is a rather nice thing. Things get rewired, neural pathways, the heart, the DNA, all rewired to make this autopilot system work. Contact with your own higher levels, which we've touched on. Creative expression par excellence, whatever it is that you're doing, is really going to come in this really pure, authentic expression. Overwhelming compassion can be overwhelming at times. A beautiful thing, compassion. Starts with compassion for the self, of course. With the light body, there's a oneness. You hear about that a lot. I suppose, like in Buddhism, sometimes I don't find it so helpful to think of that, but certainly there's a oneness when all the chakras are coming together. They're all come together into one. So this is, there's some dogma and some approaches and traditional approaches to chakras which will have to be reviewed as more and more people go through this. I think about this as three becoming one. At some point, what people call the mind, body, spirit complex becomes one. And mind, body, spirit, emotions for me are probably more important than a lot of those things, so maybe it should have been four become one, but what was separate before is coming into one, and that's physically felt. So you're really, at some point, you're looking for guidance, and actually the guidance is really within you. So whatever choice you make is the right choice, as long as it is in alignment with heart and moving towards that. I'm hearing, it's not happening to me for some reasons which I won't go into, they don't reflect very well on me today, but there's even some individuals who are starting to emit some sparkliness. They call it God glitter. I'm going to use this in one of my poems. The structure is the internal structure is changing in order to hold more light, and this is apparently, I don't have any direct experience of it, but causing people to start emitting some sparkliness, which is rather nice. We talked a little bit about star soul family, and so I've talked a little bit about that. One thing, it's important to remember that part of you is, in some other dimensional situation, whether that be on a light ship or a planet or whatever it is. you know, but this part of you is having an experience in density, a learning experience in density, of which there's an opportunity to sort of leave those and requirement for those experiences behind. One thing to say there is that a lot of people identify very, very strongly with one particular other civilization, where Palladians, Arcturians, and so on. You know, and this is a bit problematic down here. You know, ultimately they may consider themselves a star seed or something from this, let's call it a civilization, and they may have had, you know, many lifetimes there and resonate very strongly with that. You know, ultimately we transcend even that. You know, ultimately, you know, the ascension goes on and on. You know, you are light that knows itself as eternal light, and the light just is, and it's not Allah. You know, it's not defined by a particular other dimensional civilization. So, you know, there's lots of that kind of information out there. So that's my input. The last thing to say in this little section is that plants and animals and the natural world, what people call the elementals, kingdoms, and so on, you know, everything is looking to ascend. I certainly find that in my interactions with the animal world in particular. It's sort of two-way interaction, which is rather nice. And you can learn to be a generator, receiver of that. Okay, remember, you know, ultimately it doesn't matter the speed at which this all happens for an individual. The last thing I'm going to look at, I've taken from somebody who I have a lot of respect for and listen to, well, not so much now, but in the past I listened to regularly, Sandra Walter. I'll see if I can put her link in the description. But it was really looking, and a bit of my own input as well. I'm just adapting something that she covered in a recent video. Is looking at the kind of long-term, I got it written down, a long-term spiritual journey overview. So she was talking about, you know, we've chosen to incarnate over many lifetimes, whether that be here on Earth or somewhere else, or all of that, and experiencing radical separation from Source. My input there is that the 3D really, as a training program, as a training context, really polarizes. So it is capable of making these highs and lows and really expanding the consciousness, and then, you know, building that learning into the being. That's, I think, one of the reasons why we experience it. Part of this is eternal personal growth, and this is like the obsession of the universe. This is Sandra's words. She talks about ascension being the obsession of the universe, because really it never stops. A lot of what I've been talking about, and a lot of what you find in ascension guidance is connected with different religions, and particularly Buddhism, I suppose, and for me the Vedic stuff. Zen for me was very important, and so on. But without those structures of control or belief. So you can find a lot of beautiful stuff in Christianity, even you find all sorts of, I don't want to not mention religion, Islam, of course, very nice. But you know, ultimately this is the journey. This is a journey of a madman, really, of self-realization becomes God-realization. One realizes that one is being trained to become a divine, in some way, a divine being. You know, really almost you look at the sky and see all of those stars, and you can imagine a master, an ascended master, is that star, and actually has risen to a point where he or she is trusted with sculpting others. I mean, it's that, and that's kind of, you know, it's crazy, really. And enlightenment or self-realization is considered to be close to madness, because, you know, really what we know, reality is really the normality, whatever that is real madness, and one has to step out of that when one realizes. So it's certainly key to my approach and the way I think about it and the way that I certainly write about it, is this is a sort of training program, and we're building these skills and capacities, and they have a function and a way of working for us as humans, and then at some point we realize that these are also ways of training to be conducting the sculpting of others. Written down a few notes from Sandra's stuff. On a micro level, she said, what is the long-term, I don't know, destination or something, I think she was talking about. But on a micro level, your choice, what would you like to get out of Ascension? What would you like to experience? This is, as long as it's assisting in the ascension of humanity, you can really choose what you want. I don't know whether all of you, or we'll just discover that there's a one or two or whatever amount of projects which are really important, that actually if you step away from that, it's going to slow everything down. But you do have a choice along the way as to how you'd like to experience it, what kind of revelations you'd like to come in, and what kind of upgrades and so on. A lot is up to you, and there's a responsibility, responsible creation again. On a macro level, she said, Ascension is the project of the universe. There's no end to this. You're continually up leveling. In the past, ascended masters, we believe have laid down templates for this time, and have then gone on to what I've heard called the Divine Council of the Overseers, the Divine Council of Overseers. Whether it's called that or not, I don't know, but that you'd have these masters then in position, having laid down the templates to make it easier for everyone, that they're in a position of, what is the word, supervision, I guess, and assistance, and that makes a lot of sense to me and my experience. In terms of goals, so the long-term journey overview, one goal then would be that one has evolved enough to not have to return to experience lifetimes in density as we are at the moment. In my language, one goal would be to graduate. Then one would take one's place in terms of supervision of others, or who knows, I mean, maybe you have all sorts of choices where you can go on to do, but certainly there's no end. I imagine God, Source, is constantly working on itself, let's call it itself, constantly wanting to find out more about what I am and so on. This is, in my experience, I've come to understand that we're being assisted by other dimensional beings who are on other planets or in our system, and we're all connected. And as being at the bottom, you always have to kind of seed down to what's below you, and this is true of everything. And the helping others lower than you in some way. And I like to think about it as that we have, that in our system we'll be connected to these other sort of going up in dimensions, and for each one to get on to the next level, the one below them has to move up, I have no idea if that's true, but that speaks to me as a poet. Finishing up now on the video, we're learning how to reconnect to love. We're learning how to end the separation from source, and we're being gathered now and parented through that process. It's time to step out of karma. Of course, you step out of karma, then you're also creating your own karma. You're not dragging anything behind you, but you are creating it in your thoughts, emotions and actions on a daily basis. And of course you can then create beautiful things that happen to you, giving something away and then it coming in quickly. The difference, not difference, but the upgrade is I guess the speed and the perfection of it, really. Long term, I suppose I go to rainbow gatherings and I sometimes hear people talking about the rainbow body and this kind of thing. This is a rainbow body is something that a master who has mastered the light body develops. So this, as I understand it, I don't want to be thought of as an expert on this at all, but that transfiguration and sort of almost like disappearing in your ascension was what's been reported of many beings. This would be the rainbow body. So one thing at a time. First, this process is this is a super tough training program, so don't get ahead of yourself. Yeah, it continues, Yeah, like she said, it's the obsession of the universe. What's important for individuals at this time is to, I suppose, have the goal of graduating from density. De-densification would be, I suppose, how I would sum it up into that one word. And to think about something like enlightenment, it's so many different ways, and people have written about, talked about different approaches to that. But essentially, enlightenment is, to enlighten, to become light, is exactly what I've talked about today. The process of gradual integration of the spiritual light body while in human form, and that is to enlighten, and that's a more true to its sort of the definition of the word. It's a gradual process. Don't worry about how long it's taking. You can think about these wonderful things about I've talked about, just mentioned the Divine Council of Overseers, these templates that the masters have left behind. What happens after that? Do you get a choice? A choice of becoming a star or whatever it is. This is nice for my own creativity, but really this is happening now. This is happening now. It's happening on the ground. It's happening through the body. It's happening through your direct lived experience. There are no substances that you can take which enable this. There are things, people do all sorts of things, don't they, that can assist in some way, but really this and maybe those assist some people and other people they don't. Maybe it's open up, all different modalities and techniques and systems and approaches that I'm sure can assist. But really, this is happening through your experience of your reality, of your life stream, and how you react to that, and the choices that you make. You untie the knots in your own consciousness through direct lived experience. There are no shortcuts. We don't know, I certainly don't know, maybe somebody out there has some information about this, but how long is this going to last and what's going to happen. But more and more we're becoming, one is becoming immune to what's happening in the world. I don't even have the newspaper on my phone anymore, you know. It's keeping focused on the self, the journey to true self. And I think I finished. I think I finished with that. So I wish you good luck on your path. You can contact me through my website. I'll put the link below. In the future, over the coming months, I'll be doing some videos on some aspects of this in more detail, and I think I'll also be doing some kind of chat, evening chats or something like that, about some subjects either I want to talk about or that come in through either the clients that I'm working with or people that I meet. Or yeah, I think the last thing to say is I mentioned before that I got a lot of feedback from people to say that they felt that the kind of things that I've talked about today and that I might talk about in a collective setting in some way, that they felt that this was part of their journey, but they found that overwhelming, and so many different people used almost the same word. They wanted it to be more manageable. So that's a extremely normal reaction to have. I don't know whether it's a good idea to go headlong into it, or whether just to keep working on yourself, and work with that curriculum that's constantly being rolled out in front of you. Some of the big jumps will come in, will be little glimpses of them, little sort of like what would be called revelations, or like experiences of some state of consciousness, and then a couple of years later you find that you're able to experience that on a more permanent level. Onwards and upwards. Okay, bye-bye.
So this one's called Direct Line to Divine Self. You've a direct line to God. It's as simple as that. He's listed in your contacts, in another name in fact. Source, higher self, imaginary friend. You knew in the beginning, and you'll know it at the end. You'll kick yourself 1,000 times when you discover it was true. The Lord God Almighty, what the fuck, was speaking, yes, to you. That gentle yet persistent voice would drive you round the bend. You said, it's spam, it's not for me, a reply you would not send. He told you time and time again what you were doing wasn't you. Sometimes he'd kick you in the balls and leave you black and blue. But up you'd get and build again your house on grains of sand. And when the wind would blow it down, squat someone else's land. You soldiered on and on and on, but he just wouldn't shut his gob. You did your best to drown him out, but booze just wouldn't do the job. So you spent 10 years in the Space Cadets, and it was really rather fun. But like so many folk before you, flew a little too close to the sun. And then, one day, you did something you'd never done before. You lifted up the drawbridge and bolted shut the door. They tried to call, to interfere, give advice you did not want, but you stood your ground and turned the dial to your personal commandant. Now listen here, you heard him say. You're there to grow your being. Wake up, remember who you are, and change your way of seeing. To free yourself from density, express yourself and play. We're sculpting you most carefully, so you'll be like me someday. And that was when you realized you too were a central sun, divinity in trainers with nowhere left to run. A single cell of heaven sent, nirvana's building block. You'd steered your course, you'd found your way, and all upon this rock. I'm conscious, present, here and now, you told everyone you knew. You posted 20 times a day, your fan base slowly grew. I've a Christed state of consciousness, you just couldn't keep it in. They stamped the papers straight away, drove you off to the loony bin. You'll kick yourself 1,000 times when you discover it was true. The Lord God Almighty, what the fuck, was speaking, yes, to you. You changed your phone, you cut the line. When would this nonsense end? You said, it's spam, it's not for me. You decided to unfriend. They jacked you up, they tranquilized, they tied you to a bed. They told you to improve your health, gave you farmer fug instead. You managed to maintain your strength, slipped closer to the door. And when he beamed you out of there, their mouths, they hit the floor. You wandered, lonely as a cloud, wrote poetry and prose. You walked the miles in gratitude for the awesome life you chose. And that's when bliss and ecstasy began to enter every cell. You wrote this story for yourself, only you would dare to tell. And pretty soon your light did shine, Kundalini it did wake, cleared everything that wasn't you, the journey of the snake. They cut you deep, they pressed delete, so you'd fill you up with love. Live a life of juicy service that would fit you like a glove.